To the Point with Kelly Dunn and Michael Williams.
Republican Mitt Romney makes a special stop in South Florida to court Hispanic voters. Will they be the key to winning the Sunshine State? Good morning and welcome to The Point. When Barack Obama ran for the presidency in 2008, he won 57% of Florida's Hispanic vote, which helped him win the state and ultimately the White House.
Now, though, the polls show only 48% of Hispanics in Florida say the president should be reelected. So what is it going to take to win over the Hispanic vote? Joining us today to answer that question and much more are Juan Kukui. He is the chairman of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Palm Beach County and very active in Republican politics. And Isidro Raul Mejia, he is the head of the Democratic Hispanic Caucus in Palm Beach County. And gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So let's get to the point. What are the chances that the Republicans are going to win over enough Hispanic votes to result in the president losing the state of Florida?
Well, let me defend our ground here. I think that the president still has strong support in the Hispanic community. There's obviously been some side steps to that. In terms of immigration reform, we have the highest amount of deportations in any presidency thus far. But then again, he did put in a freeze for close to 400,000 deportation cases, in which he set new guidelines for ICE to look over these cases, you know, families that he obviously doesn't want to separate, but it's going to be difficult. You know, you have Senator Rubio, who could be a wild card. You never know when he could become an actual presence in the race, and that obviously will become very interesting as that comes along. But I think that what's most important is that the president needs to stand strong on what he believes in, what he told the Hispanic community he was going to bring. The DREAM Act is what we're fighting for now, so we have to see if we can get those things first before we ask for our support.
Mr. Kukui, your response there, how do Republicans win over the Hispanic vote, and what is the single most crucial issue to Hispanic voters? Overall, to most Americans in total, it's the economy. When you break it down, is that also true there, and how do they view the president on the economy, and how do they view what they're hearing from Republicans right now?
Well, absolutely, and you know, nationwide, we're seeing a big trend right now. Only 57% of the Hispanic voters are voting Democrat. That's the lowest it's ever been in the history ever since it's been recorded. So there's already a trend going towards getting away from the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has always been favored by Hispanics because of more moderate immigration rules, and it's always been viewed as more you know, towards the Latinos. But I think what's going to happen coming up, and it's already started, is that Hispanics are going to vote the economy. Right now, the unemployment rate for Hispanics is at 12.5% compared to the national average of 9%. That's a 33% increment. Whereas take 2006, when the economy was robust and we had a Republican president, it was at 4.9%, which was very close to the national average. So you're going to see that the voting is going to go along terms of the economy, jobs, business failures, and that kind of thing, which is affecting the Hispanic community.
So how do you combat that?
Well, with facts, the truth, and a lot of canvassing and hard work.
Well, what are the facts and truth as you see them? What's the bottom line? Everybody votes pocketbook is the typical saw of politics, the typical truth. How do you counter the economic argument, and what truth will you put out there?
Well, with immigration reform, this is one thing we could pull out. We have a guest worker program that's part of immigration reform that we've been looking for to push and have people that can, you know, have some sort of viable access to work for people who have small businesses, who need somewhat of a lower cost of labor or just any overall operation cost. If we can tell them that in the past years we've been trying to push the DREAM Act, just overall comprehensive immigration reform without any actual support or initiatives from the Republicans, because if you look at the Republicans, what have they done other than say, no, we don't want this, no, we don't want you. And the Hispanic community obviously does want somebody who can take us on and help us get to where we want to be. So if we can really just highlight the fact that the Republicans, they have no strategy to win the Hispanic vote other than to say, oh, are you better off now than you were under George W. Bush? Or do you look at the Democrats and say, look, we're pushing for the DREAM Act, gives students the ability to go to college, educate themselves, and have a better future.
The DREAM Act you're speaking of right now, by the way,
course.
for the uninitiated who aren't familiar, the DREAM Act gives them that opportunity.
Yes, not just if you go to college, but if you serve your country,
Right.
which is another important thing that we have to point out. There are a lot of brave men and women from the Hispanic community fighting for our country. Now, you know, and I don't know if you want to bring up anything else, but I mean, if you ask from us, we also want to see something reciprocated. We want to see that support from our government officials, whether they be Democrat or Republican.
11% of the Florida electorate, roughly, is Hispanic. You have clearly come back to immigration time and again. It's going to be your single wedge issue, yes or no?
I would say yes.
And how do you counter that? There's been a lot of tough talk by Republicans after the Arizona reform gained traction. Governor Rick Scott had talked about it forcefully here, though it did not gain traction in the state legislature. You've heard comments recently. Newt Gingrich said he'd like to see people who've been here 20, 25 years not be deported, not see their families split up. Others have been tougher on that. Do you think Republicans can make headway on that divisive issue?
Well, you know, there's a lot of issues that immigration affects, and the election is probably one of the least, because when we're talking about immigration, we're talking about people that are maybe not citizens, maybe are undocumented, so they don't vote. The people that are the electorate in the Hispanic community are citizens, they're here, they're voting. The Republican Party has generally been conservative on that issue, but as you're pointing out, I think the Republicans and some of the conservatives are starting to see that there has to be some kind of reform. There are many jobs that Americans won't take, and so we have to bring in foreign workers to do those jobs. The solution might be work permits for these people. We can't just open our borders and let anybody in. You know, I came from Colombia. My family came from Colombia. We came here. We did it legally. We did it the right way. I just don't think that we can open our borders and let everybody in that taps our resources, increases our debt, and don't pay taxes. So some kind of a reform that allows people to come in legally, do the work, and allows them to come in legally, I think is what we need.
Raul, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just to touch something on that we just spoke about. If you look at former House Speaker Gingrich, he came out with what seemed to be a more moderate approach from a Republican figure in terms of immigration reform, and he's been, you know, bombarded with just negative criticism about this. I mean, does that really allow the Republican Party any room to say, we have the proper immigration reform for you to vote for us? It does come back again to economics.
But the president campaigned on immigration reform and nothing happened, so...
Well, and again, and this also gets back to the source of where the Hispanic community is. We need to be better educated about the political institutions of this country. We need to understand what happens, why there's a midterm election. We get the argument that the Hispanic vote didn't show up for the midterm election. It showed up for the 2008 presidential election. Look what we had.
But Mr. Gogoy rightly points out that people who will go to the polls are here legally, are registered to vote, and questions whether this is going to be enough of a wedge issue for those people who are looking at the economy overall to make it the issue. Bottom line, do you see the Hispanic vote and anger over economic and or immigration issues being enough yet in Florida to be the tipping point for the presidential election? 11% of the electorate. Are we still a cycle or two away before they become a voice that can truly be the tipping point for the presidential race here?
I think not only in Florida, but nationally.
Not only what? They are still two election cycles away.
No, I think that we're
right
there.
Now.
Yeah, I think that we're there.
Will be the tipping point.
2010 and midterm elections, Congress, the Republican Party controlled Congress, partially from the Hispanic vote, not only from Florida, but throughout the country. In 2004, and we're going back to the presidential election, in 2004, the Hispanic electorate voted George Bush in states like New Mexico, Florida, Nevada, and Colorado. In 2008, those swung the other way, in addition to California and Texas. We believe that in the 2012 elections, much like the midterm elections, those trends will continue. A lot of it because of the economy. As I mentioned earlier, the unemployment figures pan out that Hispanics are highly unemployed because of what's going on in the economy. There's no jobs. The construction industry is in the doldrums. A lot of Hispanics worked in the construction industry, in tourism, and there's a lot of unemployment in those areas. However, as far as the economy, it's not just the unemployment, it's businesses that are failing. Hispanic-owned businesses that are failing because they can't get financing because of the problems with the banking industry and with our debt crisis.
Certainly Marco Rubio was celebrated when he was elected. If he is chosen to be a vice presidential GOP running mate, what do you think that'll change things? How do you think that'll be received?
I think it's going to be excellent. I mean, I think he is an excellent candidate. He has a lot of energy. He has a lot of charisma. What's not to like? The only thing that could hurt him is his lack of experience. He's only been a senator for a couple years, a little bit less than Obama was, and Obama was able to be elected.
Very briefly, Marco Rubio, we talk about him every week. Every week he says, I'm not interested,
Right.
But if in the end of the day in the summer he says he is that a slam dunk for Republicans in Florida, candidly?
No.
Very
And
briefly, why not?
again,
That's
back
going to be a
to-
superstar you'd have on the Republican ticket, hypothetically.
Hypothetically, yes. It wouldn't change things. It would make it more interesting, getting back to a point that we just brought up. But it wouldn't be a slam dunk just because, again, of the inexperience. Hispanics would want to see what he actually has done. And again, it goes back to immigration reform. Do Republicans really want, and I think the Hispanics who are here legally have to put themselves in the shoes of immigrants and say, if I was illegally here and, trying to fight hard for my family, try to get a better future for my kids, who can really help me get to that?
So you've made it clear where you stand. Immigration will be your wedge issue. The economy for you and Republicans. We'll see if Marco Rubio ends up being on the ticket that he says he has no interest in being on and the difference it'll make. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your insights and coming in today. We'll watch the issue develop during the campaign. Ahead, the newest candidates for the Senate come out swinging. That's next.
And now for our roundtable with News Channel 5 political analyst and coordinator of the American Studies program at Lynn University, Robert Watson, and Brian Crowley, author of CrowleyPoliticalReport.com. Welcome.
Morning. Gentlemen, the Hispanic vote in Florida. How pivotal? Republicans is going to make the economy the wedge issue, it seems, listening to our guests. Democrats say immigration will be theirs. Talk about what you see.
I think they're both right. I think the answer is C, all of the above. I think it's going to be both the economy and immigration. This election is liable to be razor thin. All the predictions are that. With the Hispanic vote being 11% plus of the electorate, that could end up swinging the vote. And I think what we see is the Hispanic vote in Florida is absolutely in play. Back in 2008, the Democrats trounced. They won 2-1 in the Hispanic vote around the country. But in Florida here in 2010 in the governor's race with Alex Sink and Rick Scott, it was darn near 50-50. Some of the exit polls showed 50-49 in favor of Scott. So the Republicans have closed the gap here.
Well, I'm a little hesitant to lump Hispanics all in one big, group. I mean, we have Hispanics in this state that are from Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, Guatemala, Mexico. So there are differences within those groups as they view politics. There are differences generationally between people that are first-generation immigrants to this country and people who are fifth-generation immigrants to this country. That said, I think that we clearly heard from our guests that for Democrats, they see the wedge issue being immigration. And I think that's because unemployment is extremely high in Florida. You look at the Obama administration and the sense is that he hasn't led sufficiently on that issue. The Hispanics are among the groups that are hurt the hardest by the unemployment in this state. And if I were a Republican running in this state, I'd be pushing real hard among Hispanics about the unemployment issue.
And Mitt Romney, of course, last week getting huge Cuban-American endorsements in Miami to illustrate and punctuate how important that vote will be.
Let's move on, talk about Congressman Connie Mack. He formally announced that he is running for the Senate, and he quickly took aim at the incumbent.
I am going to run for the United States Senate because, frankly, I think the people of Florida have had enough. They've had enough of every time they turn around, Senator Nelson is supporting and helping Barack Obama with Barack Obama's agenda of more government, whether it's
simply ignoring his Republican opponents who have been out there on the campaign trail. So talk about this strategy, Brian.
Well, it's a strategy I think that former Senator George Lemieux tried when he first entered this race. He can try to ignore them in December, but I suspect, they're not ignoring him. He's not going to be able to ignore his opponents. I don't think they're going to be getting out of the race. I think it's going to be a long slog, and Connie Mack is going to need to prove pretty quickly that he can raise the kind of money that you need to run in the state and that he can command the issues in a way that justifies his claim right now to be the front runner.
Yeah, I think that the fundraising is something he's going to be able to do. He's got a lot of goodwill through his father, who held this exact same Senate seat. His grandfather, among Floridians of a certain age, older folks like my colleague here, Brian, still remember the grandfather. Plus, the joke is always that The Senate is the Millionaires Club. Some people call it the Harvard-Yale Alumni Association. Others call it the Sons of Former Senators Club. So it's going to be tough to knock off a Mac in Florida.
But very, very briefly, what does he have to defend about his record? He's been part of a Congress that when Republicans held it doubled the national debt. What will Nelson's attack be? What will Mac's defense have to be? And that's presuming that he even ends up being the nominee, of course, very quickly.
I think you're spot on. What we saw is while he ignored his Republican challengers, they did not ignore him. They're piling on already, and they're trying to tie him to the current Congress, whose approval is historically low. The other thing they're trying to say is he's married to the widow of Sonny Bono, she is a congresswoman in California. They're saying he's never in Florida. He spends all his time in Washington or in California.
Just real quickly, I think getting back to our Hispanic topic earlier in the space, he opposed the Arizona immigration law. That plays pretty well with a lot of Hispanics in the state, while some of his rivals have been supportive of the Arizona law. It's, again, dealing with Hispanic voters in the state, which are very important in a Republican primary, is very tricky.
And it could help him in the general election, too, if he's indeed the nominee.
All right, coming up, the Republicans' most popular governor stops in our area. What he's saying about the presidential race, coming up next. New polls out this week show Newt Gingrich surging in Florida. Mitt Romney is slipping. This one by the Public Policy Institute. It shows Gingrich with 47%. Romney falling below the 20% level, coming in at 17%. Kaine at 15%, and the rest of the candidates in the single digits. New Jersey Republican Governor Chris Christie was in our area campaigning for Mitt Romney and downplayed the latest numbers.
These Gingrich poll numbers are as solid as the Kaine poll numbers were, as solid as the Perry poll numbers were, as solid as the Bachmann poll numbers were. I mean, they're just not solid. Mitt Romney supporters are with him, and they stick with him. They don't move from candidate to candidate.
Does he have a point, or is Gingrich showing that he has the staying power more so than some of the others?
Well, I think that Governor Christie's right. Mitt Romney's numbers don't change very much. They've stayed the same. His 2-week flavor of the month comment, the difference here is that we're getting later and later. We're only a matter of weeks now before the first votes are cast, and even since the PPP poll, there was another poll that came out that showed Newt Gingrich in Florida at 50%. And more telling, they also polled people who are supporters of the Tea Party within the Republican Party, and 54% of them are supporting Newt Gingrich. That's very important in the Florida primary.
When the barrage of ads starts, when January hits, will he have the ground game and the money in Florida to sustain that?
Well, I think you're spot on. The question is, at the end of this third quarter of fundraising, which ended in September, Newt Gingrich was $1.2 million in debt. He's erased that debt, but he has nowhere near the money that Romney has. So the difference is this, I think. Most of the Republican candidates are looking at Iowa and New Hampshire. That's where their focus is. Newt's really focused on South Carolina. Despite what Governor Christie said, Romney's focused on Florida. He's now focused on Florida. He knows he's got to win Florida, and he's looking at that Hispanic vote. He's learned from 2008. He had an anemic 15% of the Latino vote in 2008. McCain ran away with it. So he's been hitting the Hispanic stump. He's had one of his sons who speaks Spanish, has been speaking Spanish from the podium. He's gotten the key endorsements that you mentioned earlier from 3 prominent Cuban-American politicians in Miami, all 3 of whom endorsed McCain back in 08. So Romney recognizes that Florida could be all the marbles for him.
Over 3 decades of covering politics, nobody believes in the money game and the ground game more than I do. With a huge asterisk now this year. I mean, the reason these guys are going up and down in the polls is not because of campaign ads, it's because of these debates. Televised debates, which is and the internet and the social media aspects of it.
Plus to the point, our coverage.
And to the point, obviously. And the dynamics this year are different than we've ever had before. It's almost like when TV first became a big player in politics. And all of these candidates that have managed to come up, go down, and they've gotten there because of these debates. And I still believe in the ground game. I still believe in the money, but I got a huge asterisk this year because of these debates.
We also have to remember the old Rudy rule. Rudy Giuliani put all of his eggs in Florida. Didn't turn out so well for him.
Back with more in a moment. As always, it wouldn't be a to the point without a Crowley closer.
Well, we had one surprising development last week. We've got the first congressional redistricting maps that have been offered up by the Florida Senate. Those maps will change. The legislature will start discussing these in January. But the guy who I would not have expected to get hurt among the most was Allen West. And he has lost a significant chunk, if the map stays the way it's been designed, a significant chunk of Republicans. He's picked up some Democrats, and there's even a rumor out there that he might wind up running against Tom Rooney.
Wow.
That would be something.
Let the fireworks
Yeah.
begin.
We'll do the Watson wrap-up next week.
That's right.
I've been waiting in the wings.
We're developing it. We're
It's
developing
coming.
it. We're developing it. We
It's
promise.
coming. Absolutely. Thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you have any comments about the show, go to WPTV.com and click on the political link. Thank you for being with us and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.